were being ripped off because their money was being diverted to stuff that they didn't intend. And no one understood this. This was the case that I was making, but we got raked over the coals in the media and the Muslim community in Chicago for basically going after a charity. And right, because what could be nicer than a charity with pictures of these poor Muslim widows and orphans? But our point was that we're not going after the Muslims. We're not saying that the Muslims of Chicago who are donating to these charities were bad. We're saying that they're victims.
Yeah, and at that time, there's a lot of Islamophobia too.
There's a lot. I mean, the Muslims were on their heels, right?
Yeah.
They were being blamed for everything.
Yeah.
And so I get why they had their back up and they were very defensive about the case that I was working as part of this team. But I hope history vindicated us, because we ended up closing down these charities, deporting some of the leaders, putting others in prison, and we basically cut off the flow of money from these charities to Al Qaeda, and I think that was a good thing. I'm proud of our accomplishments in that case.
Were you guys able to cross check like how much money actually ended up going to them?
The case was not the evidence we had was not a linear storyline. It was really a mosaic, because by the nature of money going into a war zone, which produces widows and orphans, and finding out where it goes, that money's fungible, and it's hard to follow the cash. It's not like a investment fraud case domestically where I can follow the money from the investor to the cocaine that the bad guy bought with it, or the gambling. And so we never really got the entire story down about how much was going. We got bits and pieces of them buying a package of a giant shipment of hand warmers for the trigger pullers in Chechnya who were at war with the Russians in their own jihad and stuff. So it was a lot of evidence like that. They're buying equipment for for Muslim fighting groups elsewhere, but that was not what the donors intended. That's not what the donors signed up for. And so. Yeah.
Was this national, or was it focused mainly Chicago?
The charities were Chicago.
Yeah.
They just happened to be Chicago based. They were accepting donations nationally, and most of their the work that they were doing was overseas. I mean, these charities were not directly supporting the 9/11 attacks. The 9/11 attacks weren't an expensive operation, right? It was a bunch of guys who went to flight school and then with box cutters. Yeah. And so, anyways, then that ends, and I find myself kind of trying to figure out, what do I want to do with my career?
So before going to that, did the situation 9/11, and then of course, like, you break down a charity that's in your own city, did that change your perspective at all about, I guess, the country, the city that was, you kind of grew up knowing, like, that surrounded you? Did you look at people different after that? Or
No, I wouldn't say that. No, I mean, I looked, one thing they taught me was I was always one agent working dozens and dozens of cases on the fraud squad. And there were other agents each who had their own caseload. And the culture of the FBI was such that I could grab a friend and he would go out and do an interview with me, or I'd grab 5 guys to do a surveillance, or 4 other agents to do an arrest. And it was very collaborative in that respect, but we weren't really working as teams. I had to manage my own cases. And so I went from that to having one case, and then a half a dozen agents working that case together as a team. So it really taught me collaboration in a way that I had never learned before during my fraud days.
What is going on, everybody? Quick pause in the action. Just want to say that if you're enjoying the content thus far, you can do me a huge favor and leave this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss any future content. And if you're on Spotify or Apple Music, leave the podcast a 5-star review and make sure to follow so you don't miss any future episodes. As a reminder, this is the second part with Tom, so make sure to check out part 1 as well. And with that, let's get back to the episode. That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's like, again, it's those moments, those hardship where, like, people look at it, so it's so easy to be like, man, that sucks. But there's always positive aspects that come out of it, and kind of growth that, if you don't lean on, those situations can really, kick you while you're down. But if you lean on, like, they can, years later, you can still be looking back on it and say, like, that was a good period in my life where I was able to, kind of push forward. Yeah. So you speak about the next step in the career. What's going through your mind at that point, figuring out
where am I going to land? Yeah. And so my days with counterterrorism were coming to a close. I didn't really want to be a counterterrorism agent.
I was going to ask that. Was there like a feeling of...
Well, what I didn't like about the counterterrorism work is I have such respect for the agents who do it, but it's really playing defense, right? Yeah. There's not that many terrorist acts here in the US for us to investigate and play whodunit. And so then what you're really doing is investigating people who may have like evil in their hearts and like jihad on their minds, but they haven't done anything illegal yet. And then we're going to try and disrupt them before they do the next terrorist act. It's really hard, Reed. I mean, it's really hard, and the means by which we celebrated our victories were always confusing to me. You know, I drive home and look up and see the Sears Tower. I'm like, well, it's standing. I guess I've done a good job today.
Yeah.
And so, as opposed to a fraud case, which you have a guy in an orange jumpsuit at the end of it, right? And so while I had all the respect in the world for the counterterrorism agents who got good at it and fell in love with that type of work, it wasn't for me. I was a criminal agent, and I wanted to do criminal cases with a beginning, middle, and end. And I wanted them to be historical crimes that had already happened or were happening right now that I could build a case.
So let me ask you about, the idea where you identify that a potential terrorist or whatever it might be. There's been a lot of controversy around, God, I can't think of the word, but essentially setting them up. So they say that there's agents that might get involved with these groups and say like, hey, we should do this. And then people, push to it and then they arrest them. How do you feel about that?
Yeah,
and I guess
let's talk about that, because I think a lot of people misunderstand that. We had a situation like that in Chicago. There's no version of this where we are like picking random mentally ill people and saying, okay, we're going to plant the idea of them. Before we can even open up a full investigation, there must be a credible threat that this person is planning to commit a terrorist act, right? And then at that point, the FBI creates this Truman Show around them with informants and undercovers to try to inject themselves into it. Let me give you an example from my life. And again, I want to make it clear, I was not the case agent on this, but I was on the team doing the surveillance. We had a guy in in Jacksonville, Florida, where I live, who had been diagnosed with like kidney failure. And he didn't want to go on dialysis. His kidneys were failing because in his mind, he did not want to go on dialysis. And so what he said, he told some friends that you know what, if it turns out that my kidney has failed such that I'm going to go on dialysis, I'm going to go to the mosque and I'm going to just start shooting Muslims. And I'm going to allow myself to be killed during the course of that, but I'm going to take out as many Muslims as possible. That's what this guy said. Yeah. And so we get word from like he was an idiot.